The command, "let her go," hung in the suddenly quiet air. Lysandra Vale's face was a masterpiece of ruined composure. Her perfect, society-page smile was replaced by a snarl of pure fury, a side of the refined socialite Imani hadn't known existed. "Kale, you're letting this common maid walk away after she humiliated me? After she ruined everything?" Lysandra's voice was high-pitched, shattering the remaining illusion of their flawless engagement. Kale Draven finally moved, turning fully to face his fiancée, his cold eyes like chips of dark ice. "The engagement is finished, Lysandra. The party is over." His voice was void of emotion, yet carried a terrifying finality that silenced her. He offered no explanation, confirming the ruin without bothering to lie. Murmurs erupted across the hall again, fear mixing with stunned curiosity, but Kale's security team was already moving, efficiently pushing the crowd toward the exits. When Kale Draven ended something, no one dared to linger. Imani stood stiffly, still shaking, watching Lysandra's beautiful face contort one last time before she was gently, firmly escorted away by her own family's guards. The hall emptied with unnerving speed. In minutes, the ballroom, moments ago filled with 200 of the city's most powerful, armed criminals, was a vast, empty expanse of marble and shattered glass. Imani's wrinkled maid apron felt like a heavy armor that had barely held up under the siege. Two of Kale's personal guards, their faces neutral and professional, stepped up to her. "Miss Koroma, follow us." They led her not toward the staff exit, but deeper into the mansion, through corridors she'd never been allowed to access. She walked stiffly, forcing herself not to look back, focusing only on the cold reality. She hadn't died in the ballroom, but she was now exactly where she had tried to be, in the heart of the Draven Empire, but with no guarantee of survival. She had traded one danger for an unknown, potentially more lethal one. They stopped at a large mahogany door. It opened into a room devoid of warmth, a private office. No windows, just a heavy table, two steel-backed chairs, and a single lamp shedding cold light. It smelled of leather and expensive whiskey. The guards motioned her in. Imani walked to the chair and sat down slowly, folding her hands tightly in her lap to stop their frantic trembling. The heavy door closed with a click that echoed in the silence, locking her inside. She was alone with the proof of betrayal, waiting for the man she had just saved, the man who held her life entirely in his dangerous hands. The fear was a familiar shroud, but beneath it, the quiet defiance of her choice had begun to burn. Welcome to Afro-Korean with Honoro. Do sit back and enjoy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The heavy door of the private office clicked shut behind Kale Draven, the sound echoing loudly in the cold, windowless space. Imani was already standing, her legs too shaky to remain seated, but his presence was a physical weight that pressed her back down. She dropped into the chair with a silent thud, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Kale did not sit. Instead, he walked slowly to the table, his movements deliberate and controlled, removing the single object that mattered, her phone. He placed it carefully between them. "I watched it," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. Imani's throat tightened, and she could only whisper, "All of it." "Yes," he confirmed. Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. She had saved his life, but she was still facing the most ruthless man in the city, a man who had just had his engagement ruined. "Then you know why I did it," she managed to say. "I know what you heard," he corrected, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "What I don't know is why a maid would risk her life to warn me." "I wasn't doing it for you," she blurted out, the words escaping before she could filter them. His brow lifted slightly in silent question. "For me," she said quietly. "I couldn't live with knowing, doing nothing. Not after." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Kale studied her face, not with the predatory look of a criminal, but with the intent gaze of a man trying to decipher a complex equation. "You planned this." "No," she denied quickly. "I swear I didn't plan the kiss. I panicked. There was no other way to get your attention without the guards silencing me first." "And the recording?" That part one planned, because no one would believe me without proof, she admitted. A faint, almost invisible smile flickered across his sharp jawline before vanishing. You're either very brave, he said, or very foolish. I've been called worse, she exhaled shakily. He leaned back slightly, arms folding across the impeccable black suit. Who are you running from? The question was calm, a statement of fact, not an accusation. Imani's chest seized. I don't know what you mean. Your hands were shaking before you touched me, he observed. That wasn't fear of me. You already live with it. Imani looked down at the cold floor. Her facade had cracked entirely. His name is Trey Kell, she finally confessed. And he doesn't know how to let go. Kale waited, letting the silence pull the remaining truth from her. He used to say he loved me, she continued, her voice barely steady. Then he started controlling everything. When I tried to leave, he followed me, threatened me. Police? Kale asked. She laughed bitterly. They told me to change my number. Move. Like fear is something you can pack into a bag. That's why you took this job, he concluded. To get close to me. Yes. And after tonight, he pressed. Imani met his eyes again. I didn't think that far. Kale finally walked forward, reaching out a hand, not to touch her, but to slide the phone back across the table. You saved my life, he said, the words heavy and absolute. Which means you are now under my protection. I didn't ask, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. The exhaustion of the night was suddenly overwhelming, but the fierce promise in his eyes, there is no later where anyone harms you, felt like the first solid ground she had stood on in years. You didn't need to, Kale Draven replied, his gaze unwavering. No one who saves me walks away unguarded. He turned to the door. Now, everything changes. Imani blinked. Everything changes. It was both a promise and a threat. Kale didn't leave immediately. He remained standing for a moment, studying her, committing her face to memory. It wasn't the dismissive glance of the men who had overlooked her all evening, but a deep, calculating scrutiny. You're staring, she finally managed, her voice barely audible. I'm deciding, he replied calmly. Deciding what? Whether you're reckless or extraordinary. Imani let out a shaky breath. I don't feel extraordinary. No one ever does, he said. He unlocked the door. Two guards instantly snapped to attention. Escort her, he ordered. No restraints. That small detail, no restraints, told Imani more than any speech could. She followed the guards out of the sterile office and through a labyrinth of private corridors, away from the chaos of the ruined engagement party. The muffled sound of Lysandra's hysterical voice echoed once behind a closed door, and Imani flinched. She won't touch you, Kale said from behind her, having joined the escort. Not now. What about later? Imani asked softly, her fear finding its voice. Kale stopped walking. There is no later where anyone harms you. The certainty in his tone was absolute. They reached an underground garage where a black car waited, engine already running. Kale opened the back door himself. Imani hesitated, but he offered no further explanation, simply gesturing her in. She slid onto the soft leather seat, and the tension she'd been holding back finally cracked. Her hands started shaking violently. You're safe for now, Kale said, taking the opposite seat. Breathe. She tried, failed, and tried again. I didn't think I'd make it past tonight, she admitted, her voice cracking. You did, he said. Because you acted. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the venue and her old life behind. They rode in silence for several minutes until the car slowed, turning into a high-walled, gated property. This isn't a police station, she murmured. No, he said. It's one of my residences. If what you told me about Trey is true, then wherever you were staying is no longer safe. Imani's silence confirmed it. They were escorted inside. The house was quiet, minimalist, intimidating in its calm. Kale handed her a glass of water. Sit, he said, this time motioning to a comfortable couch. He sat opposite her, leaning forward slightly. Tell me everything, he commanded. From the beginning. She hesitated only a second before speaking, diving back into the nightmare of her past. She told him about Betrayal, the slow descent from charm to control, the monitoring, the first time he hit her, and the way he'd cried afterward, swearing it would never happen again. How many times did it happen again? Kale asked quietly. Enough that I stopped counting, she whispered. She detailed how she ran, how Trey followed, how he showed up outside her jobs, waiting in the dark just to remind her he could. How did you survive? Kale asked. I stayed invisible, she said. I worked places where no one cared. I moved often. I learned how to disappear in a room. And tonight, he asked, her eyes meeting his. You saved my life, Kale Draven had said, the weight of the words cementing her fate. Which means you are now under my protection. Imani had confessed everything, laying bare the years of running from Betrayal, the violent, obsessive ex who viewed her as property. Kale now knew her deepest shame and her deadliest threat. He didn't interrupt her again. He just listened, absorbing the grim reality of her life outside his luxurious, dangerous world. When she finished detailing how she survived staying invisible, moving constantly, Kale leaned back, his expression hard and thoughtful. In my world, protection isn't a suggestion. It's absolute. And tonight, you didn't just save me from Lysandra Vale, you made yourself the #1 target for every ally she has, every rival who seeks leverage against me, and, most urgently, for Trey. I know, Imani whispered. I didn't think there was another way. There wasn't, he conceded. He stood, moving toward a hidden wall safe, the motion fluid and powerful. He didn't rush, adding a measured suspense to the air. A temporary bodyguard won't work. Not against Trey, who is clearly relentless, and certainly not against people who can hide knives in silk gloves. The safe clicked open, revealing not weapons, but a stack of documents. He returned to the table, spreading 2 identical contracts before her. I offer you a permanent shield, Kale stated, the papers a stark white against the dark mahogany. A contract of marriage. Time limited, sealed by law, publicly undeniable. The moment you walk out of here as my wife, your invisibility ends, but your vulnerability vanishes. Imani stared at the contracts, her mind reeling. His wife, the absurdity of it was shocking. A maid, a girl running from a stalker, married to the city's most powerful mafia boss. It was the safest, most insane proposal she had ever received. I don't understand, she managed. Why marriage? Protection, Imani, requires a reason. If I claim you as a lover, you're a weakness to be exploited. If I claim you as my wife, you're an asset to be defended. Lysandra's allies can't touch my wife without declaring war on my entire organization. And Betrayal can't touch my wife without inviting a swift, permanent end. It's the highest wall I can build around you. He slid a pen across the table. You exchange your freedom to run for absolute, undeniable security. For 1 year. After that, the contract dissolves, and you walk away with enough capital and protection to build any life you choose, completely free. The proposition hung in the air, a choice between a terrifying, gilded cage and the constant terror of the unknown. Imani looked at the pen, then at the man who had just offered to make her his queen to save her life. Do you agree? He asked, his cold eyes waiting for the answer that would change both their lives forever. Kale Draven watched her, the pen resting on the contract. Do you agree? Imani looked at the contract, a legal document promising a shared, public life with a killer, then back at him. She didn't trust the paper, but she trusted the chilling certainty in his voice when he promised protection. However, she had lost control to one man. She wasn't about to hand it over entirely to another. I agree to the shield, she said, her voice firm, pushing through the tremor of fear. But I have my own terms. 3 of them. Kale's brow lifted, a flicker of interest in his cold eyes. Speak them. 1. No intimacy without explicit, mutual consent, she stated clearly. This is a contract of protection, not ownership. We will not share a bed, and we will not touch unless we both agree. Agreed, he said immediately, the ease of his acceptance shocking her. He hadn't expected resistance, but he seemed to respect the demand. 2. My sister, Lumi, is off limits. You cannot use her, threaten her, or involve her in your business, even for her protection. She remains safely in her own life, unaware of this arrangement. This time, Kale paused, his gaze hardening. Protection is comprehensive, Imani. Not this kind, she insisted. She is the only person I have left that he hasn't touched. You respect her freedom, or I walk away now. After a long moment of intense scrutiny, Kale gave a curt nod. Agreed. Your sister's location and safety will be managed only by you. And 3. Imani finished, placing her hands on the contract. When this time limit is up, I walk away completely free. No questions, no hidden clauses, no debts owed. I keep the money, and you leave me entirely alone. A clean break, he murmured. Is that what you want most? It's what I want most, she confirmed. Kale picked up the pen and signed the documents first, his signature a sharp, decisive script. Then we have a deal, Imani Koroma. 1 year of a legal, unbreakable shield. He pushed the documents toward her. Imani picked up the pen. The ink felt cold in her hand as she signed her name, exchanging her invisible, terror-filled life for a public, strategic safety. When she lifted her head, the contract was complete. Kale reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, heavy silver ring, not a diamond engagement ring, but a plain, solid band. He placed it on the table. This is not a token of affection, he said, his voice flat. This is the shield. Put it on. The world needs to see that you belong to me now. Imani slid the cold metal onto her finger. The weight was immediate and undeniable. In that moment, the former maid became the contracted wife of the city's most dangerous mafia boss. She was no longer running, but standing directly in the crosshairs, protected by an iron wall of his making. The following morning, Imani Koroma stood in front of a full-length mirror, no longer wearing the stained maid uniform, but a severely tailored black suit dress that spoke of wealth and authority. The silver shield ring on her left hand was the only jewelry. She was terrified. She hadn't slept, spending the night in a luxurious, sterile guest suite, trying to reconcile the life of a terrified fugitive with the sudden reality of being Kale Draven's contractual wife. He arrived promptly at the door, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, his composure absolute. We have a meeting, he stated, his eyes briefly scanning her. The family and the captains need to see the shield is real. The family and captains turned out to be nearly a dozen lethal-looking men seated around a massive oak table in a formal boardroom. The air in the room was dense with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. Imani walked in beside Kale, feeling every single pair of cold eyes analyze her, the black maid who had ruined their boss's strategic engagement and now sat in the seat meant for his fiancé. They spoke in hushed, hard Korean, pausing only when Kale began the introductions, switching to English only for her benefit. This is Imani Draven, he announced, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. My wife. Effective immediately. The alliance with the Valles is dissolved. One captain, a man with a scarred face and an unforgiving gaze, spoke up, his English heavy and precise. Respectfully, boss. A wife? After the spectacle? We need stability, not public humiliation. Who is this woman? The room went completely still, waiting for Kale's reaction. Imani braced herself, ready to drop her gaze, to disappear as she always did when confronted. But Kale didn't wait for her to shrink. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hand palm down, steady and dominant, next to hers on the table. She is the woman who saved my life from the woman you call stability, Kale countered, his voice quiet but deadly, his eyes sweeping across the table. She is my shield, my asset, and my choice. Every protection afforded to me is afforded to her. Every slight against her is a direct attack on me. Is that clear, Captain? The captain swallowed hard, his eyes dropping first, then nodding stiffly. The message was delivered with surgical precision. Imani felt the cold press of Kale's hand next to hers, a silent, powerful anchor. It was a purely strategic gesture, Yet as the meeting continued and she felt the intense scrutiny from the other men, she found herself leaning toward the warmth of his presence. She was still terrified, but she was no longer alone in the fire. The performance felt terrifyingly real. 3 days into her new life, the gilded cage felt deceptively safe. Imani had spent the time confined to the private wing of the Draven mansion, adjusting to the oppressive silence and the constant, unseen vigilance of the guards. She was a Draven now, a wife on paper, and the performance had to be maintained even in solitude. Yet, the true test of her new shield arrived not with a gunshot, but with a cheap, disposable sound. Her dedicated, untraceable phone, a gift from Kale, buzzed on the silk sheets. The number was unfamiliar. Imani's blood turned to ice. She picked it up, her hand shaking so violently the phone nearly slipped. "Hello," she whispered. A pause, and then the familiar, sickening sound of a man clearing his throat. "Hello, honey." It was Trakel. The sound of his voice, casual, possessive, and utterly terrifying, slammed her back into the old reality. It didn't matter that she was guarded by the most dangerous man in the city. Trey had found her. He always found her. "How did you get this number?" Imani demanded, her voice strained. "Please," Trey chuckled, the sound grating. "You think a little silver ring can hide you from me? I saw the pictures, babe. You upgraded. A shame you had to get all dressed up for that scrawny Korean guy to kiss you. Didn't look like you enjoyed it much." He wasn't threatening her directly. He was simply reminding her that the high walls, the bodyguards, and Kale's notorious reputation were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience to him. He was near. He was watching. The police had been useless when she was alone. They would be even more useless now that she was technically the property of a mafia boss. Kale's world, terrifying as it was the only instrument sharp enough to cut this threat out of her life. Imani hung up immediately, dropping the phone as if it were coated in acid. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the familiar, consuming urge to run, to disappear, to shrink back into the invisibility that had once been her only defense. A few minutes later, Kale's security team appeared at her door, their faces grave. He had been monitoring the burner phone line. He called, Kale confirmed, entering the room and shutting the door behind the guards. He wasn't asking, he was stating. He walked toward her, and Imani, for the first time since the wedding, didn't automatically flinch away. "He's closer than we thought," she managed, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's watching the news. He saw the ring." Kale didn't offer comfort or false reassurances. He simply stood before her, his presence a fortress of cold, controlled fury. "He has made his first move on my territory," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. "This is no longer just your problem, Imani. This is war." The burner phone lay on the floor where Imani had dropped it, a stark black reminder that the shield was leaking. The initial adrenaline of Trakel's contact had worn off, replaced by a suffocating wave of panic. She was hyperventilating, the controlled breaths Kale had taught her dissolving into sharp, useless gasps. She ran to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, trying to fight the primal instinct that screamed at her to pack a bag and disappear. She couldn't. Not now. Not with the silver ring sealing her to this life. The door to her suite opened quietly. Kale was there, having dismissed the guards outside. He saw her slumped against the marble counter, face pale, eyes wide and unfocused. He didn't rush, nor did he touch her. He simply walked into the room, his presence a heavy, grounding force. "He won't use that number again," Kale said, his voice low and steady. "It's already a deadline." "He knows," Imani choked out, her voice trembling. "He knows where I am. He saw the pictures. The walls don't matter to him, Kale. He just waits." Kale moved deliberately, pulling an ottoman from a corner and sitting down near her, keeping a respectful distance that honored their no ownership, no control agreement. "Your old life was defined by waiting," Kale stated, his gaze fixed on her. "Waiting for the blow, waiting for him to appear, waiting for the day you could safely run again. That ends now. How can it end?" Imani cried, finally looking at him. He's still out there. He doesn't follow rules. He thinks I belong to him, and he won't stop until he proves it. He follows my rules now, Kale countered, his voice snapping with authority. And he will learn a new reality. But you have to learn it too. You are the one who took the greatest risk to save me. You chose to stop running, Imani. You chose confrontation over silence. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold but intense. We are in this contract because of fear, yes, but we cannot let fear drive our actions. Fear made you a victim. Courage made you my wife. I don't feel courageous, she whispered. No, Kale said. But you acted with it. And that is the new rule of this house, Imani. I won't let fear make decisions for me, and I won't let it make decisions for you. He will come. We will wait. But we will wait on our terms, not his. You stop bracing for the impact. You prepare for the counterattack. He stood, the powerful moment of shared intent settling between them. Get dressed. We have dinner in an hour. We will talk about everything but Trey. Imani stared at him, realizing he wasn't offering comfort, but a command to reclaim control. For the first time, she felt the panic recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. She straightened her spine. The running was over. The counterattack had begun, but not with a phone call. It arrived the next afternoon via a delivery courier, a sleek, unmarked box addressed simply to Mrs. Draven. Kale's security detail intercepted it immediately, but the damage was done when Kale Draven walked into the lounge, his face a mask of cold fury, holding a single photograph. Imani's breath hitched. It was a photo of her sister, Lumi, taken through the window of the small coffee shop where Lumi worked. She was smiling, unaware, completely vulnerable. Scrawled across the bottom in cheap red marker were 3 chilling words, I see her. The color drained from Imani's face. Trey Kell wasn't just near. He was targeting her family, aiming for the one thing Kale had promised to keep protected, the sister who remained outside their contract. Kale saw the terror in her eyes, the raw, visceral pain of a mother bear whose cub was threatened. He discarded the photograph onto the coffee table, a gesture of contempt for Trey. He didn't speak the new rule this time. He simply acted on it. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, pulling Imani into a tight, protective embrace. It violated their first rule of no unconsented touch, but Imani didn't pull away. She leaned into the sheer, solid mass of him, clinging to the only fortress that mattered. The cold, crisp scent of his tailored suit and expensive cologne was a stark contrast to the rough violence Trey had embodied. I promised you a shield, Imani, Kale murmured against her hair, his voice rougher than usual. I failed to keep her safe from his gaze, but I will not fail to keep her alive. He didn't try to soothe her fear, only to absorb it. She felt the heavy, controlled thud of his heart against her ear, a metronome of lethal calm. In that moment, surrounded by his power, Imani realized something profound. She was safe because of him. The fear that had defined her entire adult life finally cracked, replaced by a sudden, intense surge of loyalty and desperate affection for the dangerous man who kept his word. She lifted her face from his shoulder, her hands moving to cup his sharp jawline. She looked into his eyes, cold, intense, entirely focused on her, and saw not the Mafia boss, but the promise of safety. Imani closed the remaining distance and initiated the second kiss. It was not the shocking, desperate public contact of the first kiss, nor the chaste, professional brush of a wife playing a role. This was a kiss of choice, of gratitude, and of a terrifying, mutual acknowledgement of the life they now shared. Kale responded instantly, the initial stillness giving way to a sudden, possessive intensity. The shield was no longer just a contract. The boundary had dissolved, leaving only the reality of 2 people choosing to face war together. The lingering warmth of the second kiss was instantly incinerated by the cold reality of the photograph. Imani's heart plummeted, not in fear for herself, but for Lumi. Her sister, the only family she had, was now the ultimate leverage in this deadly game. He wants me, Imani stated, her voice devoid of emotion, the shock turning into a dangerous, icy calm. He doesn't want money or revenge on you yet. He wants me to walk out that door and come to him, so he can prove he still owns me. Kale Draven was already moving. He picked up his phone, his posture transforming instantly from a lover to the lethal architect of chaos. He chose the wrong person to threaten, he said, his voice hard as granite. He spoke a rapid succession of commands in Korean, his tone cutting through the quiet mansion like a serrated blade. Within seconds, the house erupted. Men streamed into the private lounge, their faces grim, weapons materializing from concealed pockets. Kale's personal guards set up a temporary command center, maps spreading across the table, computers booting up, the quiet luxury of the Draven home suddenly converting into a military operation room. Imani watched the transformation, a terrifying mix of awe and dread churning in her stomach. This was the true face of the man she had married, a man whose world was defined by absolute, organized violence. She knew, with terrifying certainty, that when Kale found Trey would die. Kale turned back to her, slipping a small, custom-made pistol into the waistband of his trousers. I know how he operates. He won't go far. He wants the payoff to be public, a spectacle of dominance. Imani grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. The noise of the war prep faded around them. Promise me something, she pleaded, her eyes fixed on his. Kale's gaze was focused and intense. If he touches her, I will end him slowly. No, Imani insisted, shaking her head fiercely. Promise me you won't do this for anger. You won't do this for revenge, or to prove you're better than him, or because he challenged you. You will do this for justice. For the years of running, for the women he hurt, and for Lumi. You kill him because you have to, not because you want to. Promise me that, Kale. If you go out there as a monster, I can't let you come back. The silence returned, profound and heavy. Kale studied her face, seeing past the fear to the desperate plea for a clean soul. He reached out, his hand resting briefly on her cheek, a sign of reverence and acceptance of the impossible request. I promise you this, Imani, he said, his voice low, a binding vow. I will come back to you, and I will do what is necessary to ensure neither you nor Lumi ever look over your shoulder again. He gave her a quick, final kiss, a kiss of solemn duty, and then he was gone, moving with swift, deadly grace into the armed throng, leaving Imani alone with the ringing silence and the terrible fear for her sister. The shield was gone. The war had begun. The sudden silence after Kale Draven left was more deafening than the earlier chaos. Imani stood alone in the command center, the maps, phones, and anxious guards now the only company. She couldn't move. Her heart was split. One half was an agonizing knot of fear for Lumi. The other was a quiet, profound faith in the man who had just promised her justice. Kale's promise, I will come back to you, echoed the protective vow she had heard years ago. She closed her eyes, and the opulent, deadly room dissolved into a cramped, brightly lit apartment kitchen. Flashback start. Lumi, only 16, was trying to manage a faulty stove that sparked with every turn. Imani, 23 and exhausted from 2 shifts, rushed forward, shielding her sister from a sudden burst of flame. Lumi, be careful. Imani snapped, then softened instantly, hugging her sister close. Lumi had pulled back, her eyes shining with youthful earnestness. I just want to make you dinner, Mani. I want you to stop working so hard, running all the time. I promise, one day I'll protect you. Imani had squeezed her hand, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. You don't have to protect me, sweetie. You just have to be safe. That's all I need. But who protects you? Lumi had asked, her smile fading. Imani had answered with forced confidence, I protect myself. I always will. And I will protect you. Flashback end. The memory snapped Imani back to the present. That was the core of her fear, the failure of that promise. Lumi was the purest thing in Imani's life, the reason she had endured Kel's cruelty and years of hiding. Losing Lumi, or allowing her to be harmed, would be a final, devastating surrender to fear. The lead guard approached her cautiously. Mrs. Draven, we have initial telemetry. The burner phone pinged a low-rent motel on the edge of the city. Boss Draven and the primary team are en route. Imani nodded, her gaze fixed on the map. She walked over, pointing at a cluster of warehouses near the motel. Trey doesn't hide in motels. He likes enclosed, dark spaces with multiple escape routes. Check the abandoned textile factory here. It was decommissioned last month. Nobody goes there. The guard looked surprised, then quickly relayed the information to Kale's team. In this moment, Imani wasn't just the contract wife, she was the expert on the enemy. Her years of running had become a weapon. She could finally stop running and use her terror to hunt. The shield was gone, but the fighter remained. The textile factory was exactly where Imani's terrifying instinct told them Trey Kell would be. Kale and his primary team found Trey in a vast, dark chamber, his posture radiating the sick pride of a man convinced of his own power. Lumi was tied to a chair, terrified but unharmed, a human trophy meant to lure Imani. Kale didn't rush in with guns blazing. He employed a brilliant deception, relying on Trey's ego and his single-minded obsession with Imani. Kale's team flooded the room with light and sound, not the sound of an assault, but the voice of Imani, broadcasted through hidden speakers, pleading for Kale to leave and offering herself in trade. Trey, convinced he had won and that Kale was weak, abandoned his defensive position to strut toward the supposed sound of Imani's voice. It was the distraction Kale needed. A single, silent shot from a concealed position ended the pursuit that had haunted Imani for years. Kale had not acted with slow revenge, but with swift, surgical necessity, honoring the promise of justice. Lumi was freed instantly and rushed out of the danger zone by Kale's men, still shaking but physically safe. Kale lingered only long enough to confirm the threat was permanently neutralized before turning his back on the carnage. Hours later, the sun was rising over the Draven mansion. Imani was waiting in the lounge, unable to rest. Kale walked in alone, his suit dusty, but his body whole. He smelled faintly of gunpowder and rain. Imani rushed toward him, relief overwhelming her, and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, a fierce, desperate embrace that felt real and raw. "Lumi is safe," he murmured, his voice rough. "She is with my trusted doctor now, getting checked out, but she is fine." Imani pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "You kept your promise. You did it for justice." "I did it for you," Kale corrected, his thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. But as she looked at his face, exhausted and lined with the recent violence, Imani realized the terrifying, unsustainable cost of her safety. The relief was immense, but the vision of the war room, the guns, and the silent, final shot resonated deeper. She had asked him to be a better man, but to be with him meant forever living at the epicenter of that darkness. "You ended the contract's threat, Kale," she said, her voice shaking. "But you can't end this life. This world, this violence, it will always cost us. It will cost Lumi, and eventually, it will cost you." She had faced death for him. Now she was facing life with him, and the price was too high. The shield was perfect, but the cage was still made of blood and ambition. She looked at him, the Mafia boss who had saved her, and knew their paths could not merge without destroying the quiet future they both deserved. The weight of Imani's words, "this world, this violence, it will always cost us," settled heavily between them. She looked at the blood spatter on Kale Draven's sleeve, the physical cost of his promise, and knew her decision was final. Kale didn't argue or try to justify his empire. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulling out a thick manila envelope, the kind that held important, binding documents. "You're right," he said, his voice flat with exhaustion, but tinged with acceptance. "This life always costs. It cost me my humanity a long time ago. It nearly cost me my life on that stage. And it cost you your peace." He reached inside the envelope, pulling out the signed protection contract, the document that bound them for a year, and held it between two fingers. "When I realized Lysandra was going to betray me, I had already begun planning my exit," Kale admitted, The revelation staggering Imani. Not for love, but for survival. I was tired of the game. I was ready to liquidate and disappear. The contract was my last act of violence before trying to find peace. He looked at her, his eyes warm for the first time, free of the shadow of war. But you changed the reason. You taught me the value of a choice made with courage, not calculation. I came back to you, and now I choose you. Completely. With a decisive, tearing sound, he ripped the contract in half, then again, reducing the binding document to useless shreds of paper that drifted onto the lounge floor. The contract is void, Imani, he stated. You are free to walk away, no strings, no debt. Trey Kell is gone. You are safe. Imani felt tears prick her eyes, not of fear, but of profound relief and love. She walked to him, not as a contract wife, but as a woman making her own final choice. I won't let you walk away now, she whispered, cupping his face. You saved me, Kell. But you saved yourself, too. You chose first, he replied, referencing her reckless kiss. I'm just finally choosing back. They shared a long, quiet kiss, a kiss of genuine devotion, free from urgency or fear. Months later, there was a wedding. Not extravagant, not secretive, just honest. They had spent the time methodically dismantling his empire, a carefully orchestrated, bloodless transition that left the city stable, but Kell Draven finally free. Lumi stood beside Imani, recovered and smiling, entirely unaware of the darkness Kell had faced to ensure her safety. When Imani walked toward him in a simple white dress, Kell didn't see the woman who once trembled in fear or the maid everyone overlooked. He saw the woman who saved his life when it would have been easier to walk away. The woman who chose courage over silence. The woman he chose every day. Later that night, as they stood alone beneath the soft lights of their new, quiet home, Imani rested her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about that night? She asked. The kiss all the time, he admitted, kissing her hair. It cost me everything. She smiled. And gave you something better. It gave me you. And for the first time in his life, the former Mafia boss knew that was enough.